follow. We had actually tried to get Alex involved in Equity Week last year, and for various reasons that didn't happen. Somehow Alex managed to get me involved in this session, but we will make sure that he's involved in Equity Week 2017. I hope some of you had a chance to participate in Equity Week. I see Steve has come in. Steve was with us, and that was work that we did jointly with SID, the TIBA Institute, Development Initiatives, and a few other institutions to pull together different communities. And part of what Alex was talking about, trying to pull together different communities that are interested in issues around equality and equity and equality, whatever you want to call it, and how we move forward, which is the equity conversation, how we get to a greater equity and more equitable society. And so I was very pleased that we had the opportunity to come into this conversation, and so that this becomes a set of conversations and not just something that we do Equity Week. It sounds like we do it for a week and then the rest of the year we are inequitable, but we actually want to drive equity through the year. So my responsibility today is really to talk a little bit about the relationship between data on inequality and policy, which is sort of where Alex was ending, but only in a very narrow sense, which is around policies for allocation of resources, distribution and redistribution of resources. And that's what we focus on at the International Budget Partnership Kenya office, and that's what I'm going to be speaking about today. So I want to start with a question about what is fair, and I'm going to ask you to link up with the person next to you. I was going to pull out fake money, but I'm not going to actually do that. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just with the person next to you, and I see Alex is sitting alone, so Alex, find a partner. I want you to pretend that I'm about to give you 1,000 shillings to the partnership, to the two of you. And I want you to argue with your neighbor why you deserve the 1,000 shillings more than they do. Okay? I want you to take 1 minute. I know you'll come up with good reasons. Take 1 minute.
I think
what are the parameters that allow us? I would serve take a larger proportion of this amount. In terms of travel, I've traveled a longer distance compared to about 10 minutes. So, I live in this particular place. Two, if I get this money, I would want it to cater for my transport. Two, I deal with emergency things. So I think it will also help me in trying to sort out some of these emergency issues. So inequality, all of us should get 300 first. So we remain with 400 left. Now this 400 that is left, then now we agree on how to do it. I take 300, you will take 100. So at the end of the day, I go with 6, you remain with 4. That way then we are fair. Okay, now give me your thoughts.
That is not fair. You can't even listen to your thoughts because we all knew how to came here, right? Yes. So whether you travel to any locations that it happens.
What arguments were made and what arguments were convincing to you, if any? Yes.
She mentioned that she's younger than me. She has not made any investments. Even my age might be have invested and all. So she deserves the 1,000.
Okay. So she has a greater need to build herself up than you have, because you have had more time to do that. And were you convinced?
I gave in because I saw that she's like my daughter.
Who else?
So I use the same argument.
I think we should have shuffled you.
I'm much better number because she's a social protection argument that I'm older and I need more social protection, and we had the back and forth. So eventually compromise that I'll get the money
to take care of her.
Yes. Figure out how to use the money to take care of her. The money. Yes, so that we can get what we're looking for.
Alright, Cousin, I hope you're not planning to retire soon. We still use you for all the work. Alright, any other? Yes?
As we agreed that we will distribute that cash. First, we gave ourselves equal amounts of 300.
Okay.
Flatted, that means everybody was to get 300. Then the remaining 400 was the bone of contention, which I suggested I was to get 300, she was to get 1. Because I traveled a longer distance to appear in this place. And 2, also, my capacity to absorb the money. There are some things I needed to do, like emergency issues that I could solve. But again, she also brought in some counter arguments. I'm saying she deserved more in terms of getting the other 300, because 1, she's a young girl who has a bit of some needs that she needs to sort out. And then 2, it is immaterial on how everybody else appeared in this particular place. So there was no need of somebody trying to impose on that. So the agreement was then we gave 50-50.
Okay. All right, good. So I'm hearing several people talking about need. I don't know where this underlying theme of younger girls asking for money is coming out from all of these groups. And this group had no ladies, so maybe anything else that didn't come there.
Well, the principle on which we agreed to distribute the money, the 600 shillings, the 400, based on the principle of from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. But that is based on the development of the economy. So if the economy develops further, then that has to be adjusted based on the standard of living. It's not this standard.
So sorry, what was you got how much?
600, 400.
And that was because of his greater need or his greater abilities?
Yes, greater abilities and needs.
Which one is
much older.
The age thing is very strong. Okay. So I want to. I'm sure there were many other brilliant arguments that were made, and maybe we'll come back to them. But what I wanted was to just get us starting to think about the reasons for which we think that money should be given to certain people and not to others. Okay? And many of you talked about need in different ways. You didn't necessarily all use that word. But I need more because a certain thing where I am in my life was a common one, but also how much it cost me to get here. So different cost factors that led to you having a different need for income. But also a bit, something was mentioned about ability to use the money, and ability was also mentioned here, although it wasn't too clear to me exactly what the ability was for Shem, but we'll come back to that. So so these are some initial thoughts, and we'll go a little bit deeper into this. But what I wanted to, the reason I started there is because when we talk about distribution of resources, we often want to start talking about money, and we want to start talking about data. And of course, we're here talking about data today, and data is very critical. But we actually don't start the conversation about how to redistribute resources or distribute resources with data. We start the conversation with principles. By what principles do certain people have certain rights or certain claims to funds? That's how we have to start. And then, principles, of course, are not enough. We can say need, but then somebody says they need and another person says they need. So how do we then adjudicate those different claims? Or somebody says, I need more, and somebody says, yes, but I can use the money better. Bringing in ideas of ability or capacity or other principles, and then we have to adjudicate those claims. And to adjudicate those claims, we need to think about the principles and how we feel about them, and then we also need to bring data to bear. So we need to bring the two things together. But we start the conversation actually with principle and not with data. Now, what are those principles? I've given you in your, all of you should have from your goodie bags, and if you don't, I have extra copies here, something that was a one-page document that looks like this, that says Principles of Fairness and Practice in the front. And I want you to turn it to the back, where it says, what does equity mean? Does everyone have this document? I want you to turn to the back, and I don't really want you to read. I'm just going to talk briefly, but you have this document which lays out the 6 principles. Okay, what are these 6 principles? These are principles that emerge from philosophy, from theories of justice, that emerge from practice of distributing resources around the world, and we've just tried to distill them into 6 things. You could say, well, listen, there are other principles as well, and of course there are. There are an infinite number of principles that you can apply, but I think that most of the things that we think about fit somehow within these 6 or are related to these 6 principles. And so I just wanted to say something brief about them because they're relevant then for the discussion we want to have about distribution. So first, need. That emerged clearly from the conversation. And we usually think that people who need more resources should get more resources. And need can be defined in terms of financial need, it can be defined in terms of health needs, it can be defined in terms of lots of different service needs that we would have. That's the easy one. Everybody always agrees with that one. It's very rare to meet somebody who says, no, people who need more shouldn't get more. But the others are more complex. The second one is capacity. And what we mean by capacity is not necessarily what we often mean in day-to-day conversation. But when we talk about capacity or fiscal capacity, what we're talking about is the ability of someone to generate their own resources. So this is the difference between a poor family and a rich family. Okay? If you're a rich family, we expect you to put in more of your own resources. If you're a poor family, we expect to give you more to get ahead. That's what we mean by fiscal capacity. It's not the actual ability to spend the resources, which I'll come to. The third principle is effort. And by effort, or fiscal effort, what we mean is somehow close to capacity, but we have to make the distinction. It's often confusing to people how much we are able to do with what we have. And so what we mean there is, suppose that you have 2 counties that are of the same, that have the same GDP, meaning they have the same level of wealth. But one of them taxes the population at 20% and one taxes at 10%. Okay? The one that taxes at 20% will generate more resources from its own capacities, right? Are we together? Right? And that's making more of an effort. That's what we mean by fiscal effort. Making more of an effort to draw on what you have rather than asking somebody else to fill in for you. Okay? That's what we mean by fiscal effort. Now, what is often meant by effort in sort of ordinary language is what we actually mean by efficiency, which is how we use the resources that we have. Not where the resources come from or how we generate them, but how well we spend them. Do we use these resources in an efficient way, in an effective way to actually deliver services, or do we waste them? And so we often feel that people who use resources well should get more, and people who use resources poorly should get less. The 5th principle is a little bit different. Minimum shares is the idea, and this is often confused with something I'll talk about in a little bit, which is a basic equal share. It's a little bit different. But minimum shares basically says that no matter what happens according to these other principles, these first 4 principles, we assess you based on your need, your capacity, your effort, etc., and then we decide how much you should get. Nobody should go away empty-handed from a process of sharing. Okay? Most people feel that there's something wrong if somebody leaves that process with 0. And so minimum shares is the idea that whatever the other principles say, everybody should at least get something from the process. Okay? Now, not everybody agrees with this, but it's quite a widely shared idea. And the final principle, which sort of sits above the others, is what I'll call fair process. And fair process is the idea that we have to weight all of these competing principles. And there's no way to do that. There's no one way to do that. So we might think that need is important, capacity is important, effort's important, but they go in different directions. Somebody who has a lot of need may not make much of an effort. So how much do we give them? So we have to weight those principles. And because there's no one way to do that, there's no single social justice equation or social welfare function that tells us the answer to that, we have to kind of have a discussion and come up with a reasonable way of doing it. And that's the fair process. That whatever the decision is, it goes through a process where people give their views and we use reason to kind of come to a solution. Okay? And if we do that, then people are more willing to accept the outcome, even though they may disagree with the outcome. Nobody's going to be, there's no final decision that everyone is going to be happy with. Right? It's not possible when we're sharing resources. Okay? So those are the 6 principles. And I want you to keep them in mind as we talk now a little bit more about how we use this data for distribution. So, most of the inequality data that you saw, that Alex presented, and that's in the broader set of data that Caleb worked on and that is underlying this discussion that we're having today, is about needs. Okay? And that is, as I said, one sort of universal. You'll not find any country in the world where people are sharing resources and not looking at needs as one of the factors. Okay? But how do we assess need? And now I want us to think about what this means as we start to look at the data that we have and then apply it. When we talk about needs, I said when I was introducing the principles, I talked about needs, effort, and capacity, but I added something at the beginning. Fiscal. Fiscal needs, fiscal capacity, and fiscal effort. Because when we're sharing resources, we're not just talking about broad principles now, we're talking about money. So what do we mean by fiscal need? Fiscal need is like need, but it's about the delivery of a service. How much do we need to deliver a service? Okay, you have a need for healthcare, you have a need for water. Those are two incommensurate things. They're both important, but they have different costs. Once we start to look at the costs, then we can talk about fiscal. How much does it cost to deliver water to you? How much does it cost to deliver healthcare to you? Okay. Now I want us to think about. I want us to think about the implication of this scenario, which is based, no particular counties, but based in part of the kind of data we were just looking at. You have two counties, County X and County Y. Yes, Alex told me this doesn't work here. So you can see the rate of illiteracy, the rate of diarrhea incidents, and the rate of people without access to sanitation for the two counties. Now, on the basis of what you have, the information that you have, which of these two counties has the greater need? And for which of the two counties would you give more money? X. Any disagreement? Anybody wants to give the money to Y? You want to give the money to Y? On what basis?
I think that the numbers are, I mean, if you look at the numbers just in terms of what you've given us over there, yes, X may look like it is more, but the question is, if you're looking at the population, we don't have any information there about the population.
Good, we do not. Now, where do you want to give the money? Are you sure? Have you done the calculations? Let's look at the numbers. Okay, so when we look at rates, we can see that this area seems to be more marginalized than this area. But once we bring in population, the picture starts to change a bit. It is still marginalized in the sense that a greater percentage of the people in this area are affected by these problems. But when we look at the numbers of people, the actual numbers, then the numbers are much greater in County Y. For all cases, even the diarrhea case, right, where it's only 10% of the population. And therefore, these total cases, of course, are just illustrative because some people have both, right? They have no sanitation and they have diarrhea. So this is not of the population, but these are the number of cases. Cases are important because cases drive cost. So when we're distributing money, we need to know something about the number of people with the problem that we're trying to deliver the service to, which is where you are headed. So thank you for taking us there, okay? And that raises a question already for us then about how we use data on inequality to make decisions on allocation, okay? The cost of providing services is to people in most cases, okay? There are some things where that is not true. The relationship between the standard gauge railway and the size of your population is a bit more tenuous, right? It's not that you need one standard gauge railway for every 40 million people, right? If the population was 20 million, we would still need one standard gauge rail, or none, depending on your perspective. But anyway, the point is, the relationship between big infrastructure and the population is a bit less clear. Though obviously, as the population rises, we do need more infrastructure. But for health services, education services, vaccination, sanitation, etc., you can see a much closer link to the number of people or the number of households drives the need. But this does raise a question, which we deal with on the other side of the sheet, which you can look at later, about whether it is fair or not to give some kind of special priority to areas which are marginalized, even when the population is small. Okay, I'll leave that as a question from now. When we think about inequality as driving needs, the first thing that we said is that we need to look at the actual numbers, and that was what the example just showed. But also, we need to think about the fact that we are providing services to people, and people need services when they don't have services, right? So all the people who are here need services that they don't have, okay? But they also need services when they do have them, right? They need those services to continue, okay? Unless our idea of development is to take services from one set of people and give them to another set of people, so that those original set of people end up with no services, and now a new set of people have services. That's usually not what we think we're doing in development. We're usually trying to increase the number of people that have access to services, not keep it at the same level and just move the pieces around, right? So if we go back here, we need to, all the people who have sanitation, let's just round this off. This is about 500,000 of our 3.5 million. So there are 3 million people that have access to sanitation, but access to sanitation is not free. Making sure that those 3 million people still have access to sanitation while providing services to the 500,000 people that don't have them is part of the trade-off that we have to make when we're distributing resources. Okay? So when we think about need, we have the people who need something because they don't have it, and the people who need something that they already have, but they need it to continue. And we have to make trade-offs in the budget between these two things, between the need for ongoing services and the need to reduce marginalization, if you want to call it that, or what we might call catch-up, providing services to areas that don't have those services and that we want to catch them up to the average. Okay, I want to take an example now of how we think about this in the context of resource sharing across the counties. And this is a specific case. Of course, there are many other things that we can look at, but this is one of our most sort of transparent and easy to look at examples, which is how the Commission on Revenue Allocation formula, which we all call the Commission on Revenue Allocation formula, it's technically the Senate formula, on how we distribute resources across counties. What does it try to do, and how does it use data in the ways that we're talking about? So what I've given you here is the old formula and the new formula. This is the formula that was in place until this year, and this new formula is the formula that is in place now, okay? And this distributes money to the counties on the basis of a set of parameters, which you can see here. So for example, 45% of the funds are distributed on the basis of population size, and that has not changed between the old formula and the new formula. What has changed? You will see, when this is relevant for our discussion today, you will see that the weight on poverty went down by 2 percentage points, and those 2 percentage points were split up, and one of them went here to the basic equal share, which went up from 25 to 26, and one of them went to a new factor, or a new parameter called the development factor. Okay, and I'm going to talk more about that. But just to be clear, what the formula does is it takes all the money that goes to counties, let's say that's 100 billion in a particular year, then 45 billion of that 100 billion will be distributed to counties on the basis of how big their populations are. Larger population counties get more, smaller population counties get less, okay? And it's based on your share of the population as a percentage of the total population of the country, okay? And that's how these work across the board. Now, there's some complications in each of them, but that's the basic principle, okay? So what part of this formula is driven by the issues that we're talking about today, the redistribution towards needs that people have? In fact, according to what I just said, all of these principles, the first 4, population, equal share of poverty, and land area, are all related to need. But need in different senses, okay? One is the need, there's a population-driven need is the need for, if you have more people, then you need more services. That's what we just talked about, right? The relationship between population and services. The basic equal share is sometimes confused with the minimum share that I talked about before, but the idea is that all counties have certain basic costs that are the same across all of them, and therefore they need the same amount of money to deal with them. And you can think of an example as every county has a governor, and the salary of the governor is set by the SRC, by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, not by the county. Therefore, regardless of how rich or poor the county is, the governor's salary is the same. And there's a number of items like that which make up this amount. So that's also really a need, right? How much your fiscal need for paying those common services. Poverty is the factor that, from the original formula, gets us into the discussion that we're having about making sure that people who don't have certain things get those things. So the need for certain kinds of services. Land area is based on the idea that the larger the area that you have to deliver a set of services in, the larger the cost will be. And you can think of a basic example of that being, suppose that we have to deliver vaccines. If we have to deliver vaccines and there's a cold chain that we have to deliver them in using refrigeration and trucks that drive around, refrigerated trucks, then the cost of petrol to take those trucks over longer distances is going to be higher than the cost for shorter distances for the same number of vaccines. Okay? So that's an example. We then have something called fiscal responsibility, which I'll come back to, which is not a measure of need, or not supposed to be. And then we have this development factor, which is new, and we're going to talk about it now. Okay, let's talk about poverty first, because that's what we started with, and it's at the heart of the discussions we had earlier, and Alex already said some interesting things about poverty in the previous discussion. So CRA uses something called the poverty gap, which combines headcount poverty, meaning the actual number of people that are poor, that are below the poverty line, with the depth of poverty, which is basically to say everybody is not equally far below the poverty line. Some people, if the poverty line is at 100, some people are at 99, and some people are at 49. And those are differences in terms of how poor you are. So it combines those two things. Now the appeal of using poverty is that it's relatively easy to understand. I think you understood it before you came in, and I just explained it to you, and you all understood it, right? And it's correlated with many other things that we care about. And when we're setting up these kinds of formulas for distribution, one of the things that we can't do is we can't come up with a formula that, say, Caleb might like, because it has 1,000 variables in it, and Caleb loves data, and he wants to see 1,000 variables. That's not a good formula for sharing resources. It's too complicated. So we want to use proxies, which are measures that are simple and that relate to what we're trying to measure, but may not cover everything in detail. So the fact that poverty is a good proxy makes it useful. You can see the correlation with sanitation is 0.89. Okay, so that means that point should have gotten carried over to the next line. So that's about as good as it gets in this area. 0.89 is almost like these are the same things. Okay, it's a very high correlation. And I just stole a slide from Alex's presentation, which shows the correlations with a bunch of other things, okay, all of which are above 0.7. So these are very high correlations, meaning that the relationship between the two variables is very high, that if you were to use, say, maternal mortality to guess where places were poor, you'd get it right 70%, 73% of the time. That's one interpretation of these high correlations. And so the relationship between poverty and all these other things, nutrition, distance to health facility, education of mothers, etc., makes it attractive. Okay? However, there are some disadvantages of using poverty as well. Poverty data is outdated. A lot of our data is outdated, but poverty data is particularly outdated. I'm glad we have KMBS with us today. They're going to tell us, before we leave, when we're going to get the new poverty data, which I'm sure is very close to being produced. But the poverty data we have is based on the 2009 census with estimations based on the 2005-06 household surveys. So it is extremely old. Okay? It doesn't get much older than that. And that's a challenge. And there are some assumptions that have to be built into using data that's that old, including that between 2005 and 6 and 2009, not much changed in order for us to be confident about those estimates. And we all know that a couple things did change during that period. So that doesn't mean that data isn't useful, but there are some challenges with data of that vintage. The other problem with poverty, which I think is even bigger, is that poverty is not the main target of policy in most cases. Now, Alex sort of talked about this in a different way, but related. And that is to say, when we give money to counties, for example, most of the money we are giving them is to carry out the functions as delineated in the Constitution, which are related to health, education, water, sanitation. They are not to reduce income poverty. Actually, reducing income poverty is not a function. Which doesn't mean it's not important, and doesn't mean that we might not want to give some resources to people to reduce income poverty. We do have such programs. Conditional cash transfer programs are designed to reduce income poverty. But often what we're trying to do is make sure that people have access to services. Their income may not change, but you'll agree with me that a poor person who has access to health, education, water, etc. is better off than a poor person who doesn't. So one of the challenges with using poverty is that it's not directly related to the services that the counties are supposed to provide with the money. And therefore, over time, we're also not tracking a relationship between how much money we give you and the services you actually provide. If we're to come to Alex's point about results, we're not actually expecting the poverty rate to go down per se from the money we give you for health. It might, because if I give you more money for health, you might spend less money on drugs, etc., and so your poverty might come down, but that's a secondary benefit. The first benefit is that you have health, and so that's what we should be doing. The third problem is that while poverty is correlated highly with many things that we care about, it's correlated a bit less with some of the structural things that we might think are important. And I've just showed correlations. While the distance to primary school is correlated very highly, similar to sanitation, access to roads, access to water is not captured as well by poverty. So again, if I'm giving you money to build roads, and then I'm checking on how well you're doing by what's happening to your poverty rate, I'm not necessarily getting at what I expected you to do, which was build roads. So I might actually want to give you money on the basis of how many roads you build, or how many roads you lack. And then over time, as you build more roads, the allocations will change. So those are some disadvantages. Now, CRA, in recognizing some of these, introduces development parameter, and part of the reason I'm talking about all of this in the context of what we saw in Alex's presentation is that the development parameter is trying to move us away from poverty and towards a much wider set of measures of welfare. And that is where the link comes into the data that we were looking at. How does it do this? Well, in the first instance, the original development parameter that CRA had was more complicated. The one that was eventually approved by the Senate has 3 subcomponents, which are access to electricity, access to improved water, and unpaved roads. Okay? So in other words, we check to see how much access to electricity you have. If you have less access to electricity in your county, you would receive more money. Okay, just like if you were poor, you would receive more money. And what you can see, as I showed you in the formula, is that CRA is actually trying to move, and they've reduced the poverty parameter, and they've moved a percentage over here. And what they said is that they want to keep doing that over time. So eventually reduce the poverty parameter further and further, and substitute it with these service delivery related measures. So the development parameter will become more complex and involve more of the services. Now the advantage of this, of course, is that if you look at those 3 things, those are services that counties are supposed to provide. So they are directly related to what counties are supposed to do, and they are directly related to service gaps that they currently face. So that's an advantage of this approach. However, there are also some disadvantages, which were pointed out in that discussion of the formula. One is that when we start clustering data together, it can become complex, and it becomes harder to understand what is actually driving allocations. So Caleb will understand it. Caleb will develop the clusters and he will understand it. But a lot of people will not understand. Just like when Alex was standing up here and he had an axis that said PCA1 and PCA2, or I might be getting it wrong, PCA1 and PCA2, many of you had no idea what he was talking about. You didn't say anything, but you didn't have any idea what he was talking about. And if you found in the CRA formula, PCA1, blah, blah, and then it was composed of many different factors, you would also find it confusing. And if you would find it confusing here, then people outside will find it even more confusing. So there are one of the things we try to achieve, and that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that analysis. That analysis is critical because it's telling us what's really going on in the world, as Alex said. But when we then start to put it into the formula, we need to think about what we want to actually put in the formula. Putting those clusters together can help us, but it can also, because it can capture a lot of information, but it can also be difficult for people to understand, and we need a formula that is legitimate. A formula that is legitimate is one that people can understand, and they can understand when it changes. So if, for example, a particular county receives more or less in a given year, we should be able to tell why, because that's the whole point of having a formula. But you can imagine that if we have electricity, roads, and access to water together, and one of those goes up and another goes down, then the allocation to a county may not change, yet things have changed. It becomes harder to explain what's going on to people. So that's a disadvantage of these approaches, and the more factors you have and that you cluster together, the more complicated it gets. You can still use these variables in a non-clustered way, so the individual variables enter the formula, but then you also don't want a formula with 1,000 variables, as I said earlier, so you have to make choices. If we look at some of these things, the data that is in there currently, electricity and roads, or two of the three variables, are highly correlated in the data that we saw today, in the data that Caleb presented, and so, or that Caleb analyzed. And so, when we use things that are very highly correlated in the same formula, that's also a downside. Because what ends up happening is that we add complexity, but we don't add value. Right? It's not giving us new information, but it's just adding more variables and making it harder to tell what's going on. The final problem is that these variables have the advantage and the disadvantage. The strength is their weakness. That they get us closer to what's actually happening in the world, but they also make the world harder to understand. And then we have to think about what we're really trying to achieve with that. So I just want to give an example from the data that they're actually using in the development parameter on unpaved roads, similar to data which Caleb also looked at. This is the data. This is a table from CRA, and these are the top 10 counties in terms of unpaved roads, meaning they're the counties that are receiving the most from this parameter because they have the most unpaved roads as a share of all unpaved roads in the country. Now, if we go back to what my friend said before about population, that's logical, right? Those places that have the most unpaved roads, just like those places that have the most people, need the most services. But it leads us into a quandary here. Because look at the county which is number 1. And look at the county which is number 7. Those may not be the counties we think we are most trying to help with a development parameter, which is replacing the poverty parameter. Okay, so it's an explicitly redistributionist principle that we want to give more to those who need more. And what is happening here is that, yes, Nakuru has a very large number of unpaved roads, and Kiambu also has a large number of unpaved roads, but unpaved roads track very closely, as you can see, total roads. If you look at this column, and this column, you will see that they track each other. The numbers are not the same, but they track each other. Okay? And what that tells you is that the places with the most unpaved roads have the most roads. So the reason Garissa is not in the top 10 is not because it doesn't have a lot of need for roads, but because it doesn't have that many roads altogether. And so its unpaved roads, maybe 90% of all of its roads, but this doesn't have that many roads, okay? And so this leads us into conundrum, right? This becomes complicated now. What do we actually want to do here? So we begin to understand the world. It's more complicated than we thought it was. Okay? And this is one of the things that CRA said when they introduced this, there was a challenge. What do we do about the fact that Nakuru is number one? That wasn't really what we set out to do. But the data shows that Nakuru is number one. When we use a fairly reasonable process of doing this, it doesn't turn out to be exactly what we hoped for. Now you can think of other ways of thinking about the problem, right? You could say, maybe we need to look at how many roads we should have for an area of a particular size. And then, for example, Kiambu would fall out, right? Because Kiambu is small by comparison to our large counties that don't have any roads. And Garissa might increase. But it's not so straightforward to do that. The other challenge is that when you look at this, when you take out the Nakuru and Kiambus, you will see that the other counties that are here, for the most part, there's quite a high correlation between land area and roads already in the data. But land area is already in the formula. And what did we say about variables that are highly correlated with each other being in the same formula? You add complexity, but you don't add value. So we also have to think about it quite carefully, okay, as we try to enter these variables into the formula. We don't want to, once we've said that a county deserves, say, 8% for land area, we don't want to then sneak in another variable that's actually just land area with a different name and doubles the amount that we're giving for land area, because that's not what we set out to do. Okay? I hope we are together. So these are the complexities that come as we try to make the translation from the data that we saw, that Alex showed us, to distribution. It's not straightforward. It requires some thinking. Okay, I want to just say a few last things as we wrap up. The first is, I started by talking about 6 principles, but all we've been talking about is need. What happened to the other principles? And this is another thing that we have to bring to bear when we say that we're going to use inequality data to talk about distribution. Is that the only thing that matters? Well, CRA didn't think so, and many of us don't think so. We think that those other principles also matter, and we need to think about how we might incorporate some of them. So what CRA did originally was to introduce something called the Fiscal Responsibility measure. I believe it's still called Fiscal Responsibility, but there was some debate about changing it to fiscal effort to match the principle that we talked about. And here the idea is that we look at what counties are doing in terms of their own revenue generation. Okay? And we ask, over time, are you increasing the amount that you collect from local sources, which we take to be, or CRA takes to be, a measure of effort. Okay? Your economy is here, you are improving your revenue collection, you're growing your economy, you're giving people opportunities, and you should be collecting more revenue as a result, and depending less on the national transfers. That's a measure of effort, and we think that if you're not doing that, that perhaps we shouldn't reward you for that, because we want you to collect more of your own revenues. Good idea. We didn't fully agree with the way this was being measured, but in general, this is a principle which you will see around the world, and you will see different people trying to measure it in different ways around the world. But it brings problems. And one problem is this: you have a county like Garissa, which is high on most of our need measures, although not on paved roads, but it is high on most of our need measures. But own source revenue declined by 20% last year. Okay, that's COB data. And if you look, a number of counties had this problem. Although total revenue for counties went up, a number of counties saw their own revenues go down last year. So, what do? We want to balance between, yes, these guys have a lot of needs, but are they putting in the effort to actually generate resources to meet their needs? We may need to take that into consideration. And there's no one way to do that, but that's part of what we think about when we start thinking about how we bring in the other principles. Other people say the most common thing that I've heard in speaking to people in Kenya over the last 5 years about these kinds of issues is what we really want to measure is how well they use the money, because we know they're wasting all the money, right? That's what we call efficiency. That's not measured at all, and it's not easy to measure, as it turns out. So, but we all think it's important, so perhaps that also is something that we should be bringing into this conversation. So we need to ultimately balance the data that we have from the inequality side, which is largely about needs, with these other principles. Now, I want to end by just pointing out that this discussion is not just about the CRA formula. I've been talking about the CRA formula. First of all, counties, some of you will know this from your experiences, counties are already doing this at the county level. A number of them have ward development funds or ward development acts or related kinds of acts. In Ogea-Marakwet, it's the Equitable Development Act that distribute funds on the basis of a formula across the wards. And so they are also looking at the question of what is fair distribution. And so we need to look at it, we need to look at that same, we have to ask the same questions about that. One of the unfortunate things about the new Constitution is that it's gotten us all to focus on a set of questions and ignore another set of questions. So we're all very focused on the CRA formula and counties and devolution. Nobody's paying attention to what the national government's doing with the rest of the money. But there's a lot that the national government's doing with the money. When my friends from Twaweza raised the issue at Equity Week, very pertinent issue about the distribution of funds to national schools versus other schools in the national budget. Same questions apply. Is that a fair distribution? Does it take into account the principles that we need? And then, of course, the challenge with that, and with many of the questions we want to ask, is that now we have some great data that's been analyzed here on the inequalities, but we often lack the data on the spending, disaggregated to the level that we would need to compare the two things. In counties, some counties a little bit better with these ward development funds and so forth. They are bringing in information about how they're spending money at the ward level, although it's still just a part of the budget. But if you look at the national budget and you try to figure out where is the money for education going, forget about it. Okay, so we are still facing those challenges, but we need to ask the same questions there. Finally, I want to say something about data as I close, and I know we'll come back to this in the next session. But most of this data is old. I was teasing Alicia because the sheet that she sent me has all the data 2014, 2015, 2013. It all looks very new. And some of it is from reports which were published in those years. But we know the truth. We have some data from DHS, and some of the health data is updated much more regularly. And that's fantastic. And what we owe to you guys is to bring that data out, because the DHS comes out and then nobody talks about it until the next DHS comes out. So you're visualizing that data in the way that you have, and bringing out the connections in that data is critical. And we need to make more use of that data. The other data is generally old. And of course, we do expect a new household survey, which will help, but this is a challenge that we continue to have. There are also some inconsistencies. And I'm sorry for my friend from KMBS, he's alone, so he'll have to defend himself. But we have had challenges with data from various places, all of which claims to be from KMBS at one point or another, but it doesn't match. And this is the same challenge that we have in my area when we look at data on spending, because it all supposedly comes from Treasury, but doesn't match. And this then undermines what we are trying to do, because it's difficult to know. One thing you may have noticed, those of you who are following these things, and I know Mary was involved in these things, is that CRA put out these fact sheets when the counties first came in with data of the type that you guys have collected. And it was very useful and all that, and even one of the things I think in your data is from there. And then 2 years later, they came out with the second round of these fact sheets. Now those you have never heard of again, because they were full of data inconsistencies. And once people like us started asking, why does this number not look like this other number, and how does this match? There can't have been a change of 90% in one variable between your two factors. Something is, then they disappeared. You will not find them on the website, you will not find them anywhere. Okay? So those challenges with data consistency remain, and we need to think about data quality issues as we go further into this. Some of the data that we have is good, but needs other complementary data to be useful. So we have data on facilities, and the data we saw in the morning has this data on distance to facilities, facility density, etc. Very useful data. But in order to be sure about what it means, we also need to know what's happening in the facilities. And we don't always have that data. So how many workers are in the facility? Are they actually there? So always the data has also shown us, right? A lot of the times the workers aren't actually there. And Alex alluded to made-up numbers for numbers of students as well. So there are challenges around understanding what the data mean, what any particular data. We have one data set that's very nice, or one variable that's very nice, but then we're missing some other. And finally, as I alluded to, or as I mentioned about counties, it is incredibly important, with all the focus that we have on devolution and distribution at the sub-county level now, to have data at the sub-county level, particularly at the ward level, possibly lower than that we can use to think about distribution within counties in an effective way. Because a lot of the data there, now, depending on who you talk to, you will hear people say, no, that data is there. Because the district development plans, District development plans are now also, however many years old they are. If that data was reliable at the ward level, which we can doubt, it is not a solution. So there's still a problem here, and I think, again, I hope we'll hear something from KMBS. One of the challenges is that we have mixed sort of mandates in terms of who's responsible for collecting that data. Counties have a constitutional responsibility to collect statistics. Setting up 47 county statistics office may not be the most effective way of doing that. So how do we work with KMBS to ensure that we have data that is representative at the level we need, rather than the national level, and while KMBS continues to do the important work that it does at the national level to generate national statistics. So there's quite a number of data challenges that will keep cropping up as we try to make use of this data for policy making, which is not to be pessimistic, but just to be aware that these challenges exist. So I think that's where I'll stop.
Thank you, Jacob.